Some debts can't be paid with money. Dalton Rivers learned that the morning he found the Apache woman kneeling beside his youngest son, her hands moving with a certainty that made his chest tighten. The boy had been screaming for an hour. Now he lay silent, watching her like she held answers to questions Dalton didn't know how to ask. 3 other families had turned him down that week. Said they couldn't help, wouldn't say why, but their eyes told him everything he needed to know about what people thought of a man who couldn't manage his own house. But this woman hadn't asked questions, hadn't judged. She'd simply knelt in the dust and started working, and that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. The ranch stretched empty under midday sun, fences in need of mending, cattle moving slow across dry grass. Dalton stood on the porch watching Kimmy Mello work, his hat casting shadow across eyes that hadn't seen real sleep in months. Tobias sat perfectly still now, his small arm cradled in her hands as she wrapped it with strips of cloth she'd pulled from a leather bag. The fall from a barn loft had been Dalton's fault. He'd been fixing the roof. Should have been watching. Should have been 100 places at once. And that was the problem. Luca stood tizenutforint. Away, arms crossed, jaw set hard for an 8-year-old. He'd been the one who found Kimla at the trading post. Brought her back like Dalton had asked. But the boy's eyes said he regretted it now. Said she didn't belong here. Said this was still his mother's house, even if his mother had been gone 2 years. Kimla didn't look up. Her fingers moved, steady, tying off the bandage with a precision that spoke of years doing this. When she finally stood, brushing dust from her fringed skirt, Dalton saw how young she was. Couldn't be more than late 20s. But her eyes held something. Older, something that recognized the weight he carried because she carried her own. He'll heal, she said, her voice quiet but certain. Keep the arm still for 3 weeks. No claiming. Tobias looked up at her with something close to worship. The boy hadn't looked at anyone like that since his mother died. It made Dalton's throat close up. What do I owe you? Dalton asked. She shook her head, started gathering her supplies. Nothing. I can pay. I don't need payment. Lucas made a sound. Not quite a word, but Dalton knew what it meant. Knew his son wanted her gone. Wanted everything back the way it was. Wanted his mother to walk through that door like death was something you could argue with if you were stubborn enough. Kimala moved toward her horse, a paint, tied near the water trough. She walked like someone used to leaving, like staying never occurred to her, as an option. Dalton's mind raced. The cattle needed moving. The fence was half collapsed on the eastern pasture. He had contracts to fulfill, supplies to buy, and 2 boys who needed more than he could give. He was drowning in slow motion, and everyone in town knew it. Watched it happen with that particular sympathy people reserve for those they've already buried in their minds. Wait, he heard himself say. She stopped, didn't turn around, but her shoulders shifted slightly. Listening, Dalton looked at Tobias, still cradling his arm, still watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. Looked at Lucas, rigid with grief. He was too young to understand. Looked at the ranch falling apart around him despite working 16-hour days. How long you planning to stay in the area? He asked. Now she turned, those dark eyes meeting his with a directness that made him feel seen in a way that was almost uncomfortable. I don't stay anywhere long. Why not? Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe, or the memory of it. People don't usually want me around more than necessary. Lucas shifted his weight. Dalton ignored him. I might have work. Dalton said carefully. If you're interested, Kimmy Mela's expression didn't change, but her hand tightened slightly on the res. What kind of work? Dalton opened his mouth, closed it. How? Did you ask a stranger to step into the hole in your life? How did you admit that you were failing at the one thing that mattered most? But before he could find the words, Lucas spoke, his voice sharp as broken glass. We don't need you. Here. The silence that followed felt like something alive. Kimmy Mela's eyes moved from Dalton to the boy. And for just a moment, Dalton saw something in her face that looked like understanding, like she knew exactly what it felt like to be unwanted. She nodded once, started to turn back toward her horse, and Dalton realized with sudden, terrible clarity that if she left now, she'd take something with her that he didn't know how to name. Something his sons needed. Something he needed. Please, he said. The word came out rougher than intended. Just hear me out. Kimmy turned back slowly, her hand still resting on the mayor's neck. The animal shifted beneath. Her touch, sensing hesitation. She learned to trust that instinct in horses. They knew when people were about to make mistakes. Dalton stepped off the porch, closing the distance between them, but stopping a respectful distance. Away. Up close, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. Not just tired, hollowed out from the inside, like a man who'd been carrying more weight than his frame could bear. My wife died when Tobias was born, he said, quietly. No preamble, no softening, just the raw fact of it. Fever took her. 3 days later. I've been doing this alone since then. Kimmy Malaw's eyes moved past him to the boys. Tobias still sat where she'd left him, cradling his bandaged arm. Lucas stood rigid, a small sentinel, guarding something already lost. They need more than I can give them, Dalton continued. His voice remained steady, but his hands told a different story. Calloused fingers working the brim of his hat. Over and over. The ranch takes everything I have. When I'm mending fence, they're alone. When I'm moving cattle, they're alone. When I'm stop, breathe. They're always alone, and they shouldn't be. She understood. Loneliness. Understood what it meant to wake up every morning and choose isolation because it hurt less than the alternative. But she also understood that some kinds of help came with complications people didn't anticipate, until it was too late. You wanted to watch them, she said, not a question. I want you to care for them, teach them, be here when I can't be. He paused, weighing his next words carefully. I can pay, not much, but fair wages. Room in the house, food, whatever you need. The offer hung between them like something physical. Kimya felt the familiar urge to refuse to climb on her horse and disappear into the vast territory beyond the ranch boundaries. That's what she always did. Help where she could, then. Left before anyone could ask questions. Before anyone could look too closely at the empty spaces inside her. But Tobias was watching her with those wide eyes, and something in her chest acted in a way she'd learned to ignore but never quite mastered. Your son doesn't want me here, she said, nodding toward Lucas. My son is 8 years old and angry at the world because it took his mother. Dalton's jaw tightened. He doesn't get to decide this. He lives here. His feelings matter. You're right. They do. Dalton looked back at Lucas, and something softened in his expression. Love, fierce and complicated. But so does keeping him safe, fed, making sure he grows up with more than just grief and cattle. Kimmy Malaw studied the ranch. The house needed repair. Boards weathered gray, one shutter hanging crooked. The corral fence sagged in. Places, posts leaning at angles that would collapse under the first strong wind. This was a man trying to hold together something that wanted to fall apart. She recognized the desperation in that. Recognized it too well. I don't stay places long, she said again. But even to her own ears, it sounded more like warning than refusal. Then stay as long as you can. Tobias chose that moment to stand up, still cradling his arm. He walked over to them with the careful steps of a child, trying not to break something already broken. When he reached Kimmy, he looked up at her with an expression so hopeful it nearly broke her resolve entirely. Are you going to stay? He asked, his voice small but clear. She looked at him, at Dalton, at Lucas, watching from his post near the house, defiance radiating from every line of his small body. At the ranch, that would swallow this man whole if someone didn't help him. At the terrible, familiar emptiness inside herself that whispered, maybe this time could be different. I'll stay for a few days, she said carefully. Help with the boys, while you work. After that, we'll see. Dalton's shoulders dropped an inch, relief visible even through his attempt at composure. That's all I'm asking. But they both knew it was a lie. He was asking for more. She was offering more. And neither of them was ready to name what that meant yet. Lucas turned and walked into the house, the door closing behind him with deliberate force. Not a slam. Worse, a statement. He'll come around, Dalton said, though he didn't sound convinced. Kimla watched the closed door, wondering what she'd just agreed to, wondering if staying, even for a few days, would cost more than she could afford to pay. Wondering if maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what she needed. 3 days passed like water through cupped hands. Kimla slept in the small room off the kitchen, the one that still held traces of whoever had lived there before. A woman's room, judging by the faded curtains and the way the floorboards creaked in a pattern that spoke of familiar steps now absent. She woke before dawn each morning, started the fire, prepared meals that Tobias ate eagerly, and Lucas picked at with theatrical disinterest. While Dalton worked the ranch, she taught the boys to identify healing plants, showed them how to clean and dress wounds, told stories her grandmother had told her. Tobias absorbed everything like parched earth drinking rain. Lucas pretended not to listen, but she caught him leaning closer when he thought she wasn't looking. On the fourth morning, Dalton found her behind the house, grinding herbs with a stone pestle. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, painting everything gold and shadow. "You're good with them," he said, settling onto the porch step nearby. His hat hung from his hand, hair pressed flat where it had been. "They're easy to care for." She didn't look up from her work. Tobias is curious. Lucas is protective. Both are good qualities. Lucas still barely speaks to you. He speaks when it matters. She paused in her grinding. "Yesterday, he asked me if I knew his mother." Dalton's hand tightened on his hat. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That I didn't." Kimla resumed her work, the rhythmic sound of stone on stone filling the silence. "But that I can see her in him, in his loyalty, his strength." Something in Dalton's expression shifted, softened in a way that made him look younger despite the gray threading his temples. That was kind. It was honest. They sat in comfortable quiet, the ranch waking up. Around them, cattle lowing in the distance, birds starting their morning calls. The kind of peace that felt fragile, like it might shatter if either of them spoke too loud. "Can I ask you something?" Dalton's voice was careful, respectful. "You said people don't usually want you around. Why?" Kimmy's hand stilled on the pedestal. She'd known this question would come. They always did eventually. The wondering, the curiosity about why a woman traveled alone, helped strangers, never stayed anywhere long enough to be remembered. "I move between settlements," she said slowly. "Offer healing where it's needed. Most people are grateful for help, but uncomfortable with extended hospitality, especially for someone like me, someone like you." Not quite a question, but an invitation to explain. She set down the pestle, brushing herb dust from her hands, met his eyes directly because evasion felt like cowardice. And she'd never been a coward. A woman without family, without children, without the future that people expect. "You don't have children." He said it gently, like stating a fact rather than probing a wound. "I can't have children." The words came out harder than she intended. Years of practice hadn't made them easier to say. "There was an accident when I was younger. Internal injuries. The healer who treated me said I was lucky to survive." "Lucky?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, as if surviving without purpose was something to celebrate. Dalton leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his face serious but not pitying. She appreciated that more than he could know. Pity was what people usually offered, and it felt like salt in wounds that wouldn't heal. "That's why you travel," he said, understanding settling into his voice. "Easier than staying somewhere and being reminded of what you can't have." Every settlement has women with babies, children playing, families growing. Kimla looked toward the house where she could hear Tobias laughing at something. "It's like watching life happen to everyone else while you stand outside looking in. But you stayed here." I said, "A few days." "It's been 4. She didn't have an answer for that. Or rather, she had several answers, none of which she was ready to speak out loud. That Tobias's laugh made something in her chest feel less hollow. That teaching Lucas, despite his resistance, gave her purpose she'd been missing. That Dalton treated her like a person rather than a problem or a Curiosity. The sound of hoof beatots interrupted them. 3 riders approached from the main road, moving with the casual confidence of men who knew they had a right to be wherever they went. Kimela recognized the type. Immediately, had spent enough time in enough places to know trouble by the shape it took. Dalton stood, settling his hat. On his head, his entire posture changed, shoulders squaring, jaw setting. Wait. Inside, he said quietly. Who were they? Neighbors. The way he said it made the word sound like threat. They heard I had help. They'll have opinions about that. Kimela stood, but didn't move toward the house. What kind of opinions? The riders drew closer, and she could see their faces now. Hard men with harder eyes. The kind who measured a person's worth by how much they matched their own narrow view of how the world should work. Dalton looked at her, something apologetic in his expression, the kind that won't matter if you don't let them. But as the 3 men reined in their horses near the porch, their eyes sweeping over her with undisguised judgment, Kimmy Malon knew that opinions like that always mattered, whether you let them or not. The eldest of the 3 men dismounted first, boots hitting the ground with practiced weight. He had the look of someone who'd spent his life telling other people how to live theirs. Gray in his beard, judgment in his eyes. Rivers, he said, not quite a greeting. His gaze moved past Dalton to Kimla. Heard you brought in outside help. I needed help. Dalton replied evenly. I got help. The man's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wanted to spit. The other 2 riders stayed mounted, flanking him like silent reinforcement. There's families in town who could have sent daughters. Women who know how to run a proper household. I asked. They all had reasons to decline. Maybe you should have asked harder. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough that Kimmy Mela couldn't hear. You've got boys to raise, Dalton. What kind of example are you setting? Bringing her into your home? Kimmy Mela felt the familiar tightening in her chest. The assumption that her presence alone was somehow corrupting. She'd heard variations of this conversation in a dozen different places each time, thinking maybe this settlement would be different, each time being proven wrong. The example I'm setting, Dalton said, his voice taking on an edge like blade on whetstone, is that I take care of my sons however I need to, and I don't. Recall asking for your opinion on how I do that. The tension stretched tight enough to snap. The mounted men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward rifle stocks they hadn't drawn yet. The kind of gesture meant to remind everyone present that violence was always an option, even if nobody wanted to be the first to choose it. Then Tobias appeared. In the doorway, his bandaged arm held carefully against his chest. The word, broke something in the standoff. The eldest man looked at the boy, then at Dalton, then shook his head slowly. You're making a mistake. That's my right. The men remounted without another word, turning their horses toward the main road. But the eldest paused, looking back over his shoulder. Mistakes have consequences. Rivers for you and those boys. They rode off, leaving dust hanging in the air like threat made visible. Kimela moved toward her mare, kept near the water trough. She'd packed light when she arrived. Wouldn't take long to gather her few belongings. Disappear before she caused more trouble than her help was worth. This was how it always went. She helped. People judged. She left. Simple pattern. Repeated so many times she could predict every stage. Don't, Dalton said quietly. She kept moving. I should go before this gets worse. It's already worse. It's been for months. He walked alongside her, keeping pace. You leaving doesn't change what they think. Just means I go back to failing on my own. You're not failing. I am drowning. I've been since my wife died. He stopped walking. Forced her to stop, too, by stepping into her path. Not blocking, just refusing to let her run without looking him in the eye. First, you know what I see when I look at you? She didn't answer. Didn't trust herself to speak. I see someone who understands what it means to carry something too heavy to put down. His voice dropped lower. Urgent. My sons need more than I can give them alone. They need someone who sees them as people, not obligations. Someone who cares about their well-being, not just keeping them fed and breathing. You have that already. You're their father, and you could be. He stopped, recalibrated. You could be what they need, what we need. Kimla's hands tightened on her horse's res. What are you asking me? Dalton looked back at the house. Tobias still stood in the doorway, watching them with those wide, worried eyes. Lucas had appeared behind him, arms crossed, but his expression less hostile than uncertain. Two boys who'd lost their mother too young. Two boys who needed something their father couldn't provide, no matter how hard he tried. When Dalton turned back to Kimmy Mela, something had shifted in his face. Resolve settling over desperation. You said you can't have children. The words hit like physical blow. She knew her face showed it, but couldn't hide the reaction fast enough. Yes, then you'll raise mine instead. The world seemed to pause. Even the wind died, leaving absolute stillness in the space between them. Kimela stared at him, certain she'd misheard, misunderstood, somehow translated his words into something they couldn't possibly mean. What? Stay. Not. As temporary help. As part of this family, Dalton's words came faster now, like he needed to get them all out. Before courage failed him. Raise my sons. Teach them. Guide them. Be the mother they need. The mother you should have had the chance to be. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to take the future you lost and build it here with us. With them, he gestured toward his sons. They need you. I need you. And unless I'm completely wrong, you need this too. Kimla's throat closed. Her eyes burned with tears. She refused to let fall. This wasn't how the world worked. People didn't just offer you the one thing you'd mourned as impossible. Didn't take your greatest wound and suggest it could become your greatest purpose. Those men don't matter. What matters is in that house. Two boys who deserve better than what they're getting. And a woman who deserves better than spending her life running from what? She can't change. He was right. She knew he was right. Could feel the truth of it, settling into her bones like coming home after years of wandering. But accepting that truth meant risking everything she'd carefully built to protect herself from this exact kind of hope. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Dalton's expression softened. Then stay long enough to find out. 2 weeks became 3. 3 became a month. Kimela told herself each morning that she could leave whenever she wanted, that this was temporary, that she was just helping, until Dalton found a more permanent solution. But the lies got harder to believe as the days bled together into something that felt dangerously close to belonging. Tobias followed her everywhere, shadow quiet, asking questions about plants and medicine, and why birds sang different songs at dawn versus dusk. His arm had healed straight and strong, the bandages long removed, but he still sought her out first thing every morning like he needed to confirm. She hadn't disappeared in the night. Lucas remained complicated. He'd stopped the outright hostility, replaced it with something more guarded, watching, assessing, testing her with small challenges to see if she'd fail, if she'd prove herself temporary like he clearly expected. Yesterday, he'd asked her to help him with a difficult math lesson. Today, he'd barely spoken. Tomorrow is anyone's guess. He's afraid, Dalton said one evening as they worked together preparing supper. He stood at the counter cutting vegetables while she tended the stove. The domestic ease of it still startled her. Afraid if he lets himself care about you, you'll leave like his mother did. Kimla stirred the pot, watching steam rise in lazy spirals. His mother didn't choose to leave. He's 8. He doesn't understand the difference between can't stay and won't stay. Dalton brought the cut vegetables to her close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Could smell leather and horses and something uniquely him. He just knows people he loves disappear. She took the vegetables, added them to the pot. There, hands brushed in the transfer. Brief contact that sent heat up her arm. They'd been careful to maintain distance, proper space between them. But the house was small. The work was constant. Proximity became inevitable. And with it a tension that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with awareness. You're thinking too loud, Dalton said softly. I'm thinking you made this more complicated than it needed to be. How so? She turned to face him, found him closer than expected. Close enough to see the gold flecks in his eyes, the lines it there. Corners from years of squinting into sun. You asked me to raise your sons, to be part of this family, but you didn't define what that means. What do you want it to mean? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Neither seemed ready to voice. Kimla knew what she wanted, had known for weeks, maybe longer. But wanting and having were different things, and the space between them felt vast as territory unmapped. I want, she started, but Lucas burst through the door, face flushed with panic. Tobias fell, he said, words tumbling over each other. Down by the creek. He's not getting up. They ran, all three of them, across the yard and down the sloping ground toward the creek that marked the eastern edge of the property. Kimya reached him, first dropping to her knees beside his small form. He lay face down in shallow water, one leg bent at an angle that made her stomach clench. Tobias. She rolled him carefully, checking his breathing, his pulse both steady. He groaned, eyelids fluttering. Don't move. Let me look at you first. Dalton knelt on his other side, hands hovering uselessly. Is he? He's breathing. Conscious. She ran her hands along his arms, his ribs, feeling for breaks. Found the problem in his right leg, just below the knee. His leg is broken. We need to set it and keep him still. Lucas stood behind them, shaking. I'm sorry. I told him not to climb on those rocks. I told him, but he didn't listen. And then he just Lucas. Kimmy Mela looked up at him, saw the guilt and fear wearing in his expression. This isn't your fault. Accidents happen. What matters is you. Got help fast. You did exactly right. Something in his face cracked. The careful guardedness he'd maintained for weeks, crumbling under the weight of seeing his brother hurt. Is he going to be okay? Yes. She said it with certainty. She didn't entirely feel, but knew he needed to hear. But I need both of you to help me. Can you do that? Lucas nodded, swiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. Dalton's jaw was set so tight she could see the muscle. Jumping, but his hands were steady when he reached for his son. They carried Tobias back to the house together, moved with the careful synchronization of people who'd learned to work as a unit without realizing it. Kima directed them, calm and focused, falling into the familiar rhythm of managing crisis. This, she understood, this she could control, not like the complicated tangle of feelings between her and Dalton, not like the terrifying realization that she'd stopped thinking about leaving. Not like the way Lucas looked at her now, with something close to trust breaking through his resistance. They laid Tobias on his bed. Kimala sent Lucas for her medicine bag, sent Dalton for strips of which she could use as splints. When they were alone, Tobias's eyes opened fully, focusing on her face. Am I going to die? He asked, voice small. No, squeaked. The endearment slipped out before she could stop it. Natural as breathing. Your leg is broken, but I'm going to fix it. You'll be walking again before you know it. Promise? She smoothed hair back from his forehead, the gesture maternal and instinctive. I promise. Lucas returned with her bag. Dalton with the wood. Together they worked, setting the bone, splinting the leg, wrapping it secure. Tobias spit down on leather too. Keep from screaming. Tears streaming down his face, but he stayed still like she asked. Trusted her completely. When it was done, Dalton carried his son to a proper bed, while Kimala and Lucas cleaned up the supplies. The boy worked in silence for a while, then stopped, looking at her with an expression too old for his face. You're not leaving, are you? Not quite accusation, not quite plea. Kimmy Malon met his eyes, saw the fear beneath the question, the desperate hope he was trying so hard not to show, and she realized that somewhere in the chaos of the last month, she'd already made her choice, had made it maybe the first day when Dalton asked her to stay, or maybe even before that, when Tobias looked at her with those eyes that saw past every defense she'd built. No, she said quietly. I'm not leaving. Lucas nodded once, sharp and decisive. Then, so fast she almost missed it, he wrapped his arms around her waist in a fierce hug before running off to check on his brother. Kimmy Mela stood alone in the gathering dusk. realizing she just made a promise she had no idea how to keep. But for the first time in years, the uncertainty didn't feel like drowning. It felt like possibility. Tobias healed slowly, his leg bound in splints that kept him restless and frustrated. Kimi Mela spent hours beside his bed telling stories, teaching him to weave small baskets from dry grass, showing him how to identify bird calls through the open window. Lucas joined them more often now, sitting cross-legged on the floor, pretending he wasn't listening while absorbing every word. 3 weeks after the accident, she found Dalton on the porch after the boys had fallen asleep. He sat with his back against the house wall. At beside him, exhaustion carved into every line of his body. The cattle drive had taken 2 full days, and he'd returned covered in dust and dried sweat. "You should rest," she said, settling beside him with careful space between them. "Should do a lot of things." He didn't open his eyes. "Most of them I can't manage. You're doing more than most men could. Most men don't have help like you." His eyes opened then, finding hers in the dim light spilling from the window. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for them, for us. You gave me a home, a purpose. That's thanks enough. It's not the same." He shifted, turning to face her more fully. "You saved Tobias. Twice now. You've given Lucas something I couldn't, a way to trust again. You've made this house feel like more than just a place we sleep between working." The air between them felt charged, heavy with things neither had spoken aloud. Kimela's heart beat faster, awareness prickling across her skin. They'd been so careful, so proper, but careful. Didn't change the way his presence made her feel alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "Dalton, I need to say this." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "When my wife died, I thought that part of my life died with her. Thought I'd spend the rest of my years just surviving, making sure the boys made it to adulthood. Didn't think about happiness. Didn't think I deserved it." "You do," she said quietly. "You deserve that and more. So do you." His voice dropped lower, rough with emotion. He was barely containing. "You deserve to be more than help, more than someone passing through. You deserve to be seen, wanted, chosen." The words hit her chest like physical impact. She couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think past the roaring in her ears and the way he was looking at her. Like she mattered, like she was exactly where she belonged. "The boys need me," she managed. "That's enough, is it?" He stood then, offered his hand to help her up. She took it, let him pull her to standing, but instead of releasing her hand, he held it, thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her throat close. "Because I think you need more than that. I think I need more than that." They stood in the doorway, framed by light from inside and darkness, pressing close beyond the porch. Kimela's breath came shallow, every nerve ending alive with awareness of how close he was, how his hand felt warm and steady around hers, how he smelled like horses and leather and something uniquely him that she'd come to recognize without thinking. "This is complicated," she whispered. "Life is complicated." He raised his other hand slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted. She didn't. His palms settled against her waist, warm through the fabric of her dress. The same gesture, from a thumbnail that would define this moment. But sometimes the complicated things are worth it. She should pull away, should maintain the careful distance they'd preserved for weeks, should remember that she was here. For the boys, that making this about something else would change everything. But her body refused to listen to reason, swaying closer instead of retreating. "Those men who came before," she said, needing to voice the fear before it consumed her. "They'll use this against you, against us. Say things that will hurt the boys. Let them talk." His hand tightened fractionally at her waist. Not pulling, just holding, grounding. "I spent 2 years caring what people thought, trying to fit their idea of what I should be. I'm done with that. My sons are happy, safe, loved. That's all that matters. And what about you?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "What do you want?" His eyes held hers direct and unflinching. "I want you to stay. Not because I need help with the boys. Not because you're useful. but because when I think about the future, about what life could look like, you're in it. Every version of it. And I don't want to pretend otherwise anymore. Kimela's hand found his chest resting over his heart. She could feel it beating hard and fast, matching her own. I'm afraid of what? That I'll believe this is real. That I'll let myself have this, and then somehow it'll be taken away. I can't promise nothing will ever go wrong. His forehead lowered, touching hers. The intimacy of it stole her breath. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere. This isn't temporary. You're not temporary. Not to me. Not to them. Inside the house, one of the boys stirred. The sound of small feet padding across floorboards, probably Tobias getting water. The moment broke gently, both of them stepping back, but not letting go entirely. I should check on him, Kimla said. I know, but Dalton's hand lingered at her waist for one more heartbeat before releasing. Kimla? She paused in the doorway, looking back. We're not finished with this conversation. It wasn't a question, wasn't a demand, just a statement of fact that made her pulse race and her fears seem smaller than the possibility blooming between them. No, she agreed. Softly. We're not. She went inside, tended to Tobias, tucked it back into bed with gentle hands and words. But her mind stayed on the porch, on the feeling of Dalton's hand at her waist, on the weight of promises unspoken but understood. Outside, dawn was still, hours away, but something was beginning nevertheless. The trading post sat at the edge of town, weathered wood and dusty windows displaying goods from territories beyond. Kimla had avoided it since arriving, content to let Dalton handle supply runs. But today, Tobias needed new boots, his old ones too small for feet that grew faster than seemed possible. And Lucas had mentioned wanting a particular book he'd heard about from another boy. She rode in with both boys, Tobias seated carefully in front of her, his healing legs still splined but stronger each day. Lucas rode his own horse beside them, sitting tall like he was protecting them despite being barely 9 years old. The stairs started the moment they entered town. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Women clutched their children closer. Men's hands moved to weapons they didn't draw, but wanted her to see. The same pattern she'd experienced in a dozen settlements. But this time it felt different. This time she wasn't alone. Ignore them, Lucas said quietly, echoing words she'd told him once. The role reversal made her throat tight. They tied the horses and entered the trading post. The proprietor, an older man with careful eyes, watched them approach. His gaze moved from Kimmy Ma to the boys, calculation visible in the lines around his mouth. Morning, he said neutrally. Morning, Mr. Patterson, Lucas replied with perfect politeness. We need boots for Tobias. Size up from his last pair. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd clearly expected trouble, prepared for it. The calm transaction seemed to catch him off balance. Right? Let me get the options. While he retrieved boxes, a woman entered, middle-aged, well-dressed by frontier standards, the kind of person whose opinion carried weight in small communities. She stopped when she saw Kimmy, recognition flickering across her face. You're the one staying at the Rivers place, she said. Not quite accusation, not quite question. Yes, Mom. Kimmy kept her voice even respectful. The woman studied her for a long moment, then looked at the boys. Tobias stood close to Kimya, his hand finding hers naturally. Lucas positioned himself slightly in front, that protective instinct blazing despite his size. Those boys look healthier than they have in months, the woman said finally. Happier, too. The statement hung in the air, unexpected. Kimela didn't trust herself to respond. Dalton, Rivers is a good man, the woman continued. Lost his wife too young. Been struggling ever since. Most of us offer help at first, but he's proud. Wouldn't accept it. Her eyes met Kimla's directly. Seems he found the help he needed after all. It wasn't approval. Exactly, but it wasn't condemnation either. It was acknowledgement. In a place like this, that mattered more than comfort. Patterson returned with boots. Tobias tried them on, declared them perfect. Lucas found his book. They completed the transaction in relative peace. The woman watching the entire time with that same assessing gaze. As they left, she called after them. Tell Dalton that Margaret Foster says hello, and that I'd be happy to have you all for supper sometime if you're interested. Kimla paused, turned back. Thank you, Mrs. Foster. That's kind. The ride home felt different, lighter, like something had shifted, some invisible barrier beginning to crack. She was nice, Tobias said, clutching his new boots to his chest. Some people are, Lucas agreed. Then, quieter. You're staying, right? For real. For real, Kimmy confirmed, surprised by how easily. The words came now. Dalton was working the corral when they returned. Shirt sleeves rolled up, sweat darkening the fabric across his shoulders. He stopped when he saw them, eyes finding Kimmy's first question implicit. It went well, she said, dismounting and helping Tobias down carefully. Mrs. Foster invited us to supper. His eyebrows rose. Margaret Foster? She's particular about company. Apparently, we passed inspection. The boys ran off to show their father the boots and book, leaving Kimmy to tend the horses. She just finished removing the saddle when Dalton appeared beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him after hours of physical work. You went into town, he said, alone with the boys. Still, his hand found her elbow, gentle pressure, turning her to face him. That took courage or foolishness. No, his thumb traced small circles on her inner arm, the touch sending sparks along her nerves. Courage, you're claiming your place here, letting people see you're not going anywhere. Is that what I'm doing? Isn't it? He stepped closer, closing the space between them until she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're building a life here with us. Her hands came to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong beneath her palms. And if I am, then I want you to know something. His hands moved to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. I love you not because you help with the boys, not because you make my life easier, but because you're brave and kind and strong, because you see broken things and help them heal. Because when I look at you, I see home. Tears burn behind her eyes. Dalton, you don't have to say it back. Don't have to feel the same way. But I needed you to know, needed you to understand that this is real, that you're not just help or convenience or any of the things you're afraid you might be. I love you too, she whispered, the words escaping like confession. I have for weeks, maybe longer. I was just too afraid to admit it. His smile started slow, building like sunrise. Not afraid anymore. Terrified, she admitted, but doing it anyway. That's my girl. He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, like she might break or disappear. But when she pressed closer, hands fisting in his shirt, the kiss deepened, became promise and claim and answer to every question they'd been dancing around for months. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, Kimala felt something inside her chest unlock. Some final piece of armor she'd been carrying for years falling away. The boys, she started, are inside playing. Dalton finished grinning. We have a few more minutes. She laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. A few more minutes. For what? For this. He kissed her again, slower this time, taking his time learning. Her. For telling you I want forever, not just right now. For asking if that's what you want, too. It is, she said, against his lips. It's exactly what I want. Inside the house, Lucas called for them. Reality reasserting itself, but not in a way that felt like ending, in a way that felt like beginning. They walked toward the house together, his arm around her waist, her head resting briefly against his shoulder. Two people who'd been broken, finding wholeness in each other. Two people building family. From loss and hope and love that refused to be contained. Tomorrow there would be more challenges, more judgments, more obstacles to overcome. But tonight they were enough. This strange, beautiful, unexpected family was enough. And for the first time in years, enough felt like everything. 6 months changed. Everything and nothing at all. The ranch still needed mending. Cattle still required moving. Boys still grew faster than their clothes could keep up. But the house no longer felt like a place people survived between work. It felt like home. Kimmy Mela stood at the stove preparing breakfast, flour dusting her hands as she shaped dough for bread. Morning light spilled through windows she'd cleaned until they gleamed, warming floorboards worn smooth by years. Of footsteps. Behind her, she heard Dalton moving through the house, his familiar rhythm as much a part of the morning as birdsong. Tobias emerged first, his leg fully healed, no trace of the break remaining except for a small scar he wore like a badge of honor. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his head against her back. "Morning," he mumbled, still half asleep. "Morning, sweetheart." She turned, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Go wake your brother. Breakfast in 10 minutes." He shuffled off, and she heard him, banging on Lucas's door. The older boy's grumbled response, making her smile. They fought like real brothers now, squabbled over chores and toys and who got to sit where it's supper. It was beautiful in its normalcy. Dalton appeared in the doorway, watching her with an expression that still made her breath catch even after months of seeing it daily. Love open and undisguised, written across his face like the simplest truth in the world. "What?" she asked, smiling, just looking at my wife. The words still felt new. They'd stood before witnesses 4 months ago, speaking vows that made official what had already been true in their hearts. Margaret Foster had been there, along with half the town, acceptance finally outweighing judgment. Those who still disapproved kept their opinions private. Now, unwilling to challenge what had become undeniable, this family worked. Lucas stumbled out, hair standing in all directions, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He went straight to Kimla, leaning into her side while she plated food. The casual affection still amazed her. How these boys had gone from guarded and grieving to open and secure. How they'd let her in despite every reason to keep her out. They ate together, conversation flowing easy. Lucas talked about a project at school. Tobias described a bird's nest he'd found. Dalton discussed plans for the eastern fence. Normal. Beautifully. Impossibly normal. After breakfast, as the boys cleared plates, Tobias paused beside her chair. "Ma." The words stopped her heart. He'd been circling it for weeks, trying out different names, testing what felt right. But this was the first time he'd said it directly, clear and intentional. "Yes, baby. Kybra, my friend James. Home after school to play." She looked at Dalton, who nodded slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Of course you can." Tobias grinned and ran off. Lucas lingered, loading the last of the dishes into the wash basin. He'd been slower to use the word. His memories of his birth other still vivid, in ways Tobias's weren't. Kimala had never pushed, never tried to replace what they'd lost, just tried to build something new alongside it. "Ma," Lucas said quietly, not looking at her. "When James comes over, can we show him the rope swing we built?" Her throat closed. She stood cross to him, wrapped him in a hug he accepted without resistance. "You can show him anything you want." He hugged her back fierce and quick, then escaped outside where Tobias waited. She watched them go. These boys who become hers in every way that mattered. Dalton's arms came around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You all right?" "Better than all right." She turned in his embrace, looking up at him. "Did you hear?" "I heard." His smile was brilliant. "They're yours now. Officially, they were always." "Mine." She touched his face, thumb brushing his cheekbone. "From the moment you asked me to stay, best decision I ever made." He kissed her softly, "Asking a stranger to raise my children." "I wasn't a stranger." "Not really." She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of leather and horse and home. "I was family. I just didn't know it yet." Through the window, she watched the boys playing, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. Watched Dalton's ranch stretching into the distance. Land she now worked beside him. Saw the life they'd built together from broken pieces. Imperfect and beautiful and more than she'd ever dared to dream. She'd spent years believing that not bearing children meant she couldn't be a mother, that her body's limitations defined her worth. But these boys had taught her different, had shown her that family wasn't about blood or birth. It was about showing up, about choosing each other every single day. What are you thinking? Dalton asked softly, following her gaze to where their sons played. That I was wrong about something. What's that? I told you I couldn't have children. She turned to face him fully, but I was looking at it all wrong. I have children, 2 of them. They're mine in every way that matters. His smile was brilliant, understanding, lighting his eyes. They've always been yours. From the moment you stayed, from the moment you asked, she leaned into him, breathing in the scent of leather. And horse and home. You gave me everything I thought I'd lost. A family, a future, a reason to stay in one place. He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. You gave us the same thing. You saved this family before it fell. Apart completely. We saved each other. Yeah. His arms tightened around her. We did. Outside, Lucas called for them. Some game that required adult supervision or arbitration. They went, together hand in hand, stepping into the sunshine where their boys waited. Kimmel looked at this life she'd built. These children who called her Ma. This man who loved her despite. No, because of all the broken places she'd carried. This community that had learned to accept what they hadn't understood at first. This future that stretched ahead, no longer empty, but full of possibilities she'd stopped believing in. She couldn't have children. She told him once a lifetime ago in a conversation that changed everything. Then you'll raise mine instead. He'd answered. And she had. She did. She would. But now with his child growing beneath her heart, and his sons playing in the yard, and his love wrapping around her like safety itself, she understood the truth. They were all raising each other, all healing, together, all becoming family in the way that mattered most. Not through blood, but through choice. Through showing up every day and choosing love over fear, hope over grief, together over alone. This was home. This was family. This was everything she'd mourned as impossible made real. This was enough. More than enough. This was everything. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier where impossible choices forge unbreakable bonds and love finds a way. Against all odds. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means the world to us.